I still remember the weight of the keys in my palm the day I signed the papers, small, cold pieces of metal that felt warmer than any blanket on a winter night. The house wasn't a mansion. It was a tidy, sunlit two-bedroom on Maple Lane with a lilac bush that leaned toward the porch like it had been waiting for me. After years of cleaning other people's kitchens and mending other people's clothes, I had finally bought a place where my hands could rest. I pictured myself baking bread with the windows open, letting the smell wander into the street like an invitation. I pictured a chair by the front window where morning light pooled, and a shelf for the photographs I kept in a biscuit tin under my bed. My late husband, my son David in his school uniform, and the one from the county fair where we all looked sunburned and happy. I thought the house would be the reward at the end of a long road. I didn't yet know that the road would keep going, turning somewhere dark. David drove me to see it the first time. "It's nice, Ma," he said, tapping the wheel at the stop sign. He had his father's shoulders and my impatience. He also had his wife, Emily, who sat in the back seat, scrolling on her phone, tiny sighs escaping like steam. "It's cute," she said when we pulled up, and I told her it was more than cute. It was level floors and solid bones, the kind of place that had survived windstorms and still smelled faintly of old lemon polish. The realtor, a woman with sharp hair and shoes that clicked, placed a neat folder in my hands and walked me through the numbers. 30 years of saving, a small widow's pension, and a lifetime of telling myself no. That was how I stood there that morning with a pen in my hand and tears threatening to ruin my lipstick. When I looked up, David smiled and squeezed my shoulder. Emily smiled too, but hers didn't touch her eyes. I tried not to notice the way Emily drifted from room to room, opening cabinets with a little frown, like a teacher grading someone else's homework. "It's old," she said, pulling at a brass handle shaped like a leaf. "But I guess that's your thing, right?" I told her old things know stories, and they don't leave you. She laughed, just a breath of sound, and said, "Unless you misplace them." I chose not to understand what she meant. I chose to focus on the light, falling in squares across the kitchen floor, the way the porch steps groaned like a friendly dog, the street that felt like a place where children still rode bikes at dusk. I imagined holidays. I imagined Emily handing me the salt without rolling her eyes. It's funny what we call dreaming, when really we're begging the world to be softer than it is. The week after closing, I packed my life into boxes that once held oranges and paper towels. I labeled them in tidy letters, then crossed out the tidy letters and labeled them again when memories hid inside things they didn't belong to. Wedding napkins tucked into a winter scarf. David's kindergarten art folded into the lid of a cake pan. I had the keys on a red ribbon around my neck like a medal. I slept with them under my pillow the night before moving, the way I used to do with my wedding ring when my fingers swelled in summer heat. I told David he didn't have to help on Saturday. He had a project at work. "Emily can run you over," he said. "She's got the morning free." Emily texted instead, "Running late. Meet you there. Don't bring too much at once." I smiled at the phone as if it had been kind to me. When I stepped out of the taxi with my first 2 boxes, the street looked changed somehow, emptier, as if the air had learned a new word and decided to keep it secret. There was a white car parked in the driveway, unfamiliar. The curtains I'd left open were half drawn. A small flag on the mailbox, red plastic, stood at attention like it knew something I didn't. I set my boxes on the porch swing and reached for the lock. The keys clinked. The ribbon whispered against my throat. The first key slid in but would not turn. I tried the second and felt the faintest give, like a held breath. It stopped. I looked at the numbers on the door, 224, and at the numbers on the keychain, 224 Maple, embossed by the hardware store. My heart ticked too fast. I tried once more, careful, steady, the way you coax a frightened bird. Nothing. The lock didn't just resist. It rejected me. I knocked then, light at first, not to be rude to whoever might be. Well, that was foolish thinking. Who else would be inside my house? The knock echoed along the porch, through the frame, into the quiet. I knocked harder, the boxes on the swing leaning into one another like old friends in trouble. Footsteps. The door opened a crack, and a thin chain drew taut. Emily's face appeared, framed by my doorway, my painted trim, my brass handle shaped like a leaf. "Oh," she said, bright as a bell. "You're here." There was something in her voice that I couldn't place, like syrup poured too slowly. I swallowed. "My keys aren't working," I said. "Maybe I'm turning the wrong way." She tilted her head and smiled, the kind of smile people use when they're about to tell you a complicated recipe. "We changed the locks yesterday. David wanted to call you, but he was swamped. New security, you know, the neighborhood." She waved a hand, dismissing my lilacs and the children I had imagined biking at dusk. "But don't worry, we'll sort everything out." She shut the door gently, then unhooked the chain and opened it wide, stepping aside the way a polite hostess might. "Come in," she said, and I stood there for a heartbeat, clutching the red ribbon like a lifeline as my keys swung and flashed. The living room smelled different, fresh paint undercut by something sharp. Boxes were already stacked along the far wall, not mine. A gray sectional had been dragged in at an angle that ignored the shape of the room. A new television leaned against the fireplace as if it had paid for the bricks. On the mantel where I meant to put the fair photograph, there was a ceramic vase the color of a bruise. "We were going to surprise you," Emily said, ushering me in without touching me. "Make it more modern. You deserve that." She walked to the kitchen and opened a cupboard. My white ceramic bowls were gone. Inside sat glass things with clean edges. "Those old bowls had chips," she said. "Unsafe." She didn't look at me when she spoke. She looked around me, past me, like I was part of the house that needed updating. I stood very still. I thought of the pen in my hand, the sharp-haired realtor, the check I'd written that left my bank account lighter than my heart. "Where's David?" I asked. My voice sounded like it had been folded and unfolded too many times. "He had to run to the bank," Emily said. "Paperwork." She paused on that word, letting it dangle. "You know how these things are, titles, deeds, all that, adulting." She laughed softly, and then walked up close enough that I could see the tiny gold flecks in her eyes. "It'll be easier if you trust us," she said, and in the pause that followed, the house itself seemed to listen. A thin fear moved through me, quick as a draft. I told myself to be calm, to ask simple questions, to take notes if I had to. "What paperwork?" I said. "The deed is in my name." Emily's lips pressed together as if tasting a lemon. "Yes, well, that's one of the things. David's been talking to a friend. He's in real estate. And there are smarter ways to hold property. Protection, tax advantages. We're a family. It's better if the house sits under a trust. You'll still live here, of course." The word "still" landed with a thud, and my stomach understood something my mind refused to. I looked down at my keys, the good red ribbon, the numbers stamped into the metal as if numbers could never lie. The front door clicked again, and David stepped in, breathless, his tie crooked. He froze when he saw me. For a second, my boy was back, the one who came home with scraped knees and tears he tried to swallow. Then his face changed, shutters sliding into place. "Ma," he said, setting a folder on the gray sectional. "You're early." I told him my keys didn't fit. He rubbed his forehead and said something about security, the neighborhood, that same vague wave of the hand. "We just want what's best," he added, and the word "we" crowded me further into a corner of my own living room. I walked to the window and touched the glass. Outside, the lilac bush lifted its green hands. It had no idea where deeds were kept. I turned back to my son. "I bought this house," I said slowly so the words wouldn't trip. "With my money." David looked at Emily. Emily looked at the folder. David opened it and held up a document with a rectangle of legal text that might as well have been in another language. "This makes it easier," he said, tapping a line with his finger. "It's a transfer, but only for protection. You'll be fine." He tried to smile, and I felt my heart shift in my chest, like furniture on a weak floor. I took the paper and skimmed words that blurred. Grantor, beneficiary, irrevocable. My name appeared, then David's, then Emily's. The ink was dark and certain, my future less so. A quiet anger woke in me, not hot yet, just steady, the kind that doesn't raise its voice because it knows it doesn't have to. I folded the paper on my knee and handed it back. "No," I said, and my voice surprised us all. It sounded like a church bell at dusk, low, final. "We'll talk to a lawyer, my lawyer." Emily laughed, but there was no syrup now, only metal. "Lawyers cost money," she said. "You don't have to make this hard." That was when something small but unbreakable in me stood up. I walked to the front door and tried my key again, once, twice, carefully, stubbornly. It didn't turn. The failure pressed into my fingertips like a bruise. I felt the absurd urge to apologize to the door for being locked out of my own life. When I faced them, both of them were watching, waiting for me to sit down on the new gray sofa and accept what they were arranging. Instead, I lifted the keys from my neck and wrapped the ribbon twice around my hand until the metal bit into my palm. "I will not sign anything today," I said, "and if the locks have been changed without my consent, then we will change them back." Emily opened her mouth, but I didn't let her finish. "This is my house," I added, each word set down like a stone in a path I would have to walk. David swallowed. For a heartbeat, the shutters in his eyes rattled. "Ma, please," he said, softer now, almost the boy again. "Let's not make a scene." I looked at the lilacs through the window and felt the anger in me find its temperature. A scene, I thought. A scene is what you get when the people you raised forget what love owes. I didn't shout. I didn't weep. I simply picked up my 2 boxes from the swing, set them inside the doorway, and stood between my son and my house like a tree that had decided it would not be moved. And in that still, bright second, before anyone spoke again, I heard something, the faint, certain click of resolve inside me, like a lock I could still open. I didn't move. The boxes breathed beside my calves like patient animals, and the red ribbon dug a thin crescent into my palm until I let the keys slip and clink against my wedding band. "Tea," I said at last, because in my life, boiling water had always been the first thing to do when the air turned sharp. "We'll put the kettle on and talk like people who share a last name." Emily blinked, surprised that I hadn't started crying or pleading, and waved toward the kitchen as if she were the owner showing off a feature. The kettle wasn't mine. It was a sleek metal thing with a blue light that made the countertop glow. I reached automatically for my old tin of loose black tea in the second cupboard on the left and found glass jars with labels written in a tidy, unfamiliar hand. Jasmine, oolong, turmeric, all the things I might like if I became someone else. I ran water, felt it drum the sink, and watched steam rise while I thought about paper, how it can be thin and helpless in a puddle, and also the knife that slices a life into before and after. We sat at the table, not the round oak one I'd planned to bring, but a rectangle that looked like it had never forgiven a meal for being messy. David stared at his phone, the way men do when they hope a solution will arrive neatly typed in a text. Emily folded her hands, her rings throwing little prisms onto the laminate. I poured tea and wrapped my fingers around the cup to stop them from shaking. "Explain it again," I said softly, slowly, as if I were your mother. David's jaw worked. "It's a trust, Ma. Protection. If anything happens to you, it keeps the house in the family. It's smart." "Who is the trustee?" I asked. He hesitated. "Me," he said, then added, too quickly, "for now." Emily leaned forward. "It also helps with certain liabilities, medical stuff. Probate is a nightmare." She said the words like passwords that would open an elevator to a better floor. I nodded as if I were learning, and while I nodded, I slid my old flip phone, the one everyone teases me for keeping, under the edge of the folder on the table. I'd learned to take pictures with it when my granddaughter showed me how in the parking lot of the grocery store. I lifted the folder an inch at a time and, through the small eye of the camera, snapped what I could see. Headings, dates, the notary's stamp that looked like an official frown. Emily noticed the angle of the folder. "You don't need to read all that now," she said, light but firm. "It's confusing if you don't know the terms." I smiled the way women smile when they're tired of explaining that they are not made of fluff. "I've read harder things," I said. "Cookbooks from the 70s. Your Instagram captions." David almost laughed, then caught himself. He reached for the top page. I let him take it, but I had what I needed. The name in the square stamp, Carl J. Mendez, and the date in neat type at the bottom, 2 weeks ago. The same afternoon I had sat in a plastic chair at the clinic getting my tetanus booster while a nurse told me about her twins. I still had the receipt tucked into my wallet because I am the kind of woman who keeps paper, who knows paper can keep her. I stood. "I need air," I said, and they didn't stop me because I was harmless in their eyes, a small, aging breeze that might rattle a door and then die out. On the porch, the swing creaked as I sat and balanced my tea on the armrest. I dialed the title company from the closing packet in my tote. I keep those numbers the way other people keep saints in their purses. A receptionist answered with a voice like an orderly hallway. I gave her my name, the parcel number, the recording date of my deed. I kept my voice calm, as if asking about a birthday cake order. "Has any new document been recorded that affects title?" I asked, just checking since I'm moving in. She put me on hold. I watched a boy on a scooter skim past my lilacs. When she came back, her tone had changed by a half shade, like clouds sliding over the sun. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "A quitclaim deed recorded yesterday. Grantor, you. Grantees, David and Emily Carter. There's a trust reference." I closed my eyes to keep the porch from tilting. "Could you email me a copy?" "We can't email recorded images to third parties, but the recorder's office can provide one. They're open until 4. I checked the watch face that used to be my husband's. It was 2:30. "Thank you," I said. "You've been very kind." I hung up and sat still long enough for the tea to go cold. Then I dialed another number from a card I kept for years, tucked behind my driver's license. Nora from church, the woman who always knew where to find a winter coat for a child or a free clinic for a neighbor who'd run out of pills. "Do you still take donations?" I asked when she answered. "And do you still know a good lawyer who doesn't mind stubborn old women?" Nora met me where I was without questions. "Legal aid on Brooke," she said. "Ask for Ms. Patel. Tell her Nora sent you. And don't you sign a thing." Her voice was a quilt. I tucked it around me and went back inside. "I'm going to the recorder's office," I announced, picking up my tote. "If there's been any transfer of my property, I will see it with my own eyes." Emily's smile thinned. "You don't have a car," she said, as if she had pointed out that I didn't have wings. "The bus stops on Elm," I replied, and looked at my son. "Or you can drive your mother, David, and we can talk in a building where the walls remember who signed what." He stared at the folder, then at me, and I saw a flicker. The boy who once walked 3 blocks in the rain to bring me a library book I'd left on the counter. "I'll take you," he said, and Emily exhaled something that wasn't quite a word. The county building smelled like paper and old coffee, which to me is the scent of truth at room temperature. We sat on vinyl chairs while a clerk in a sweater the color of oatmeal clicked through screens. She slid a photocopy across the counter in a plastic sleeve. "Recorded yesterday at 3:12 p.m., she said. I looked at the document. There it was, my name in block letters, then the slanted imitation of my signature under a sentence that said I gave up my interest in the property out of love and no money. The notary stamp sat by the flourish, Carl J. Mendez, commission expiring next spring. I didn't gasp. I didn't faint. I took a pen from my purse and wrote on the back of the sleeve neatly what I knew. At 3:12 p.m. 2 weeks ago, I was in exam room 4 at the community clinic getting my shot. I had paid with a 10 and 2 singles and had received a paper receipt with the date and time. I wrote the nurse's name too, because she wore a badge, and because I pay attention when women tell me their children's ages. David read the copy over my shoulder, then stepped back as if the paper had burned him. "Emily said you signed," he whispered, and there was something small and frightened in the way he said, like a boy repeating a rumor he hopes is true. I turned the sleeve and held it up so the fluorescent lights made the seal shine. "Does that look like my hand to you?" I asked. He didn't answer. Behind the counter, the clerk cleared her throat. "If you believe this was recorded in error or fraud," she said gently, "you'll need to file a claim and likely speak with an attorney. The recorder can't adjudicate disputes." I thanked her for the copy, for her tone, for the way she had not flinched from the word fraud. We stepped back into the hallway. David leaned against the wall and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, the way he used to when the light hurt him after soccer practice. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought she told me." His voice broke and then rebuilt itself into something flatter. "It's complicated." We walked out under a sky that had gone the color of dishwater, and I felt the old ache in my hips set in, familiar as a hymn. "Complicated is a word people use when they want to be forgiven in advance," I said. He winced. "Please don't talk about Emily like—" He stopped because he saw me looking at him like a person who had waited in lines, who had held tongues, who had paid dues. He reached for the photocopy. I kept it. "Where did you meet the notary?" I asked. He shook his head. "I didn't. She handled it, said it was easier." He meant Emily, and in his mouth she had become the whole solution, the plug-in for the hole in his life where certainty should live. "We're having a baby," he blurted, the confession tumbling out as if that word were a shield. For a second, one beating, human second, my heart turned to him, to the tiny future shaped like a peach in a quiet room, to the part of me that always gives because giving is how I breathe. Then I remembered the chain on my door and the way my bowls had vanished, as if I had never eaten soup in this world. I didn't scold him, because scolding is for small sins. I said, "Then learn now how to protect what is yours and what is not yours to take." I put the photocopy into my tote as if I were tucking in a baby. Careful, sure. "I'm seeing Ms. Patel," I added. "You're welcome to come." He hesitated long enough for the wind to lift a corner of the paper, then shook his head. "I need to talk to Emily." Of course he did. People always return to the fire that warms them, even if it also burns the hem of their coat. Legal Aid was 3 blocks of stubborn walking from the bus stop, a storefront with posters about tenant rights, and a jar of lollipops for children whose parents had to tell the truth under fluorescent lights. Ms. Patel listened without interrupting, her hands folded on a desk that had seen 1,000 emergencies. She looked at the photocopy through glasses that did not blink. "You have a strong starting position," she said. "Title insurance, medical proof you were elsewhere, and a notary we can question. We'll file a fraudulent conveyance action and a lis pendens so no one can sell or encumber the property while this is pending." The words stacked inside me like bricks I could lean on. "Will it be quick?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," she said, and smiled in a way that softened the blow. "But it will be clear." When I stepped back into the late afternoon, the street smelled like rain on warm cement, that clean beginning that comes just when you think things can't be washed. I sat on the bench and dialed the number under the notary's name. A recording played. "Thank you for calling Pack and Ship on Elm. Our notary hours are..." I hung up and looked at the sky. I pictured a counter with ballpoint pens on chains, a man stamping paper without noticing hands. I pictured a woman with my name in her mouth and someone else's signature in her wrist. My phone buzzed in my palm, a message from an unknown number. I opened it. A photograph filled the screen. My living room, my fireplace, and on the mantel where the county fair picture should have stood, a framed print that said in gold letters, "Family is everything." No words, just the picture, as if to remind me of the slogan that had been used as a lever to pry up my life. I saved the image, and then, with the steadiness of a woman who has carried casseroles and coffins, I typed 2 sentences to my son. "Do not move or sell anything related to 224 Maple. I have counsel, and this will go through the courts." I hit send and tucked the phone away, feeling the quiet click inside me again, not of a door closing, but of a deadbolt sliding into place. The bus ride home was a blur of windows and faces, all sliding past as if the world itself was in too much of a hurry to notice me. My tote sat heavy on my lap, the photocopy inside like a stone pressing down. I kept my hand over it the whole ride, as if someone might try to snatch it. When I stepped off at Elm, the sky had cracked open, and a drizzle began, soft, persistent, the kind that seeps into your bones without asking permission. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, because I knew I had entered a new kind of life, one where every move had to be careful, recorded, defended. When I reached the house, I saw Emily through the window before she saw me. She was moving my dishes into a box, my chipped white bowls, the ones she had called unsafe. They were wrapped in brown paper like fragile bones, ready to be carried out. My pulse jumped, And before I knew it, I was on the porch, the key ribbon tight in my fist. The lock still refused me, and that rejection lit something fierce in my chest. I knocked, harder this time. The door opened and Emily stood there, her mouth curved but her eyes sharp. "Back already?" she said. I didn't answer. I simply pushed past her, my tote thudding against the gray sofa. "Put those bowls back," I said, my voice low, shaking, but steady enough to cut. She froze, the paper-wrapped bundle in her hand. "They're just bowls." I stepped closer. "They are mine. This house is mine, and every chipped, cracked piece of it stays until I decide otherwise." She laughed, a brittle sound that scraped the room. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. David and I are just trying to help. You can't handle a place like this anymore. It's too much work." The words landed like slaps. Too much work. As if all the years of holding 3 jobs, raising a son alone, and keeping food on the table hadn't been work. As if I were suddenly too fragile to live in a house with a porch swing and lilacs. My breath came heavy. "Don't mistake your convenience for my inability," I said. "I have already spoken to a lawyer." That made her blink, just once, but it was enough for me to see the crack in her armor. "You wouldn't," she started, but the sentence trailed. I reached into my tote, pulled out the photocopy, and laid it on the table between us. "Fraud," I said. "That's what this is, and I will fight it." David came in then, his shirt damp from the rain, his tie hanging loose. He saw the paper, saw my face, and stopped cold. "Emily," he murmured, almost warning. She turned on him, sharp. "Don't you dare start doubting now. We're doing this for the family, for our child." His eyes flicked to mine, shame swimming there. "A baby," I whispered, the word breaking something inside me. My heart wanted to soften, but the anger held it firm. And what lesson will that child learn? That taking what isn't yours is called love? David flinched, and for a moment, silence pressed the 3 of us into the walls. Rain ticked at the windows, steady as a metronome. I picked up my bowls from her hands and set them gently back in the cupboard. "This house has survived storms bigger than the 2 of you," I said, "and so have I." My voice was steady now, almost calm. I turned to David. "You have a choice to make, son, between the truth and this lie you've been told to live in. I won't beg you. I won't cry. But know this, your mother is not so easy to erase." His mouth opened, then closed, and the silence between us said more than any words could. I lifted my tote, straightened my shoulders, and walked to the door. The lock clicked behind me, but I didn't stop. I knew the fight was only beginning, and though my legs ached and my chest was tight, there was fire in me yet, the kind of fire no storm could put out. When I closed the door behind me that evening, the rain had slowed, leaving behind the smell of wet soil and lilacs heavy with drops. I walked down the path and turned onto the street, clutching my tote as though it were my only anchor to the world. My feet carried me without asking where, and I let them. The streetlights flickered awake, one by one, and for a while I was just an old woman walking alone in the damp, trying to remember what it felt like to trust the ground beneath her. I ended up at Nora's, though I hadn't planned it. Her porch light glowed, steady and warm, unlike the cold, false brightness that now lit the living room I had once imagined as mine. I knocked, and when she opened the door, I didn't need to say a word. She saw everything in my face. "Come in," she whispered, pulling me inside, wrapping her shawl around my shoulders before I even thought to shiver. She made tea, real tea, black and strong, not the fancy glass jars Emily had stacked in my cupboards. As the steam curled up between us, I let the story spill, piece by piece, like beads falling from a broken necklace. The forged signature, the lock changed, the bowls in boxes, David's silence, Emily's cold smile. Nora listened, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "They've underestimated you," she said, her voice fierce. "They think you're tired. They think you're small, but I've known you 30 years. You are made of iron, whether they see it or not." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Iron rusts," I murmured. "Not when it's cared for," she answered. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. How her brother, 10 years back, had almost lost his farm when a cousin tried to forge papers. "Ms. Patel helped him," she said. "The courts don't move fast, but they move. You'll get your house back." The next morning, I went to Ms. Patel's office again, carrying the receipt from the clinic, my phone with its blurry photos, and a folder of every bill, tax receipt, and document I had ever kept. Years of being called fussy or too careful had left me with drawers full of proof, and now those proofs were shields. Miss Patel laid them out carefully, her sharp eyes scanning. "This is good," she said. "This is very good. We'll file the complaint this week." I watched her type, each keystroke like a hammer nailing boards into the foundation of my defense. "It may take months," she warned, "but once we file, they can't sell or mortgage the property. It will be frozen until the court decides." I nodded. "Freeze it," I said. "Let them feel what it's like to be locked out." Leaving the office, I walked slower, breathing easier. But as I turned the corner near the bus stop, I heard a familiar laugh, Emily's. She was standing by a cafe window, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand stroking her stomach. She looked happy, radiant even, as if nothing dark clung to her. A young woman stopped to admire her belly, and Emily smiled that polished smile and said, "It's our first. My husband is wonderful. He's giving me everything I need." I froze, bitterness rising in my chest. I wasn't jealous of her youth, her beauty, or even the baby she carried. I was furious at the ease with which she lied, how she had twisted everything I need into stealing what I had earned, what I had built out of nothing but grit. She caught sight of me through the glass, her eyes meeting mine. For a heartbeat, her smile faltered. Then she lifted her chin and waved, like a queen acknowledging a subject. I didn't wave back. I simply turned and boarded the bus. That night I pulled out an old notebook, the kind with a cracked spine and yellowed pages. I began writing everything down. The dates, the words Emily had said, the way David had looked at me in the county building, the text message I had received with that photograph of the mantel. My lawyer had told me to keep records, but this was more than that. This was survival. If they tried to paint me as forgetful, as old, as confused, as I knew they would, I would have the truth written in my own steady hand. The days that followed were heavy. I stayed with Nora for a while, not daring to return to the house alone. But word travels fast in a neighborhood. At the grocery store, Mrs. Ramirez whispered, "I heard about your son, what they did with the deed. If you need a witness, I saw you on that day, in line at the pharmacy." Mr. Bennett, who'd known me since our children played together, said quietly, "If they try to claim you're not in your right mind, I'll testify. You've got a better memory than I do." Each word was a small light, and I gathered them all. But not everyone was kind. My niece Claire called one evening. "Auntie, maybe you should just let them handle things. You're not young anymore. It might be easier." I bit back the tears, answered as steady as I could. "Easier for whom, Claire? For them, maybe, but not for me. I worked for that house. I dreamed in that house before I ever slept under its roof, and no one has the right to take it from me." She sighed, said something about stress not being good for me, and hung up. I sat in the quiet afterward, feeling both smaller and taller all at once. 1 week later, I saw David again. He came to Nora's, shoulders hunched, his tie gone, his eyes tired. "Ma," he said, voice low, "can we talk?" We sat in the parlor, where the curtains were always half closed. He twisted his wedding ring around his finger, avoiding my gaze. "Emily says you're exaggerating," he began. I laughed, sharp, bitter. "Does that look like exaggeration?" I asked, sliding the photocopy across the table. His eyes flicked to it, then away. "I don't know what to believe," he whispered. My heart ached at the boy still hidden inside him, the one I had once held close during thunderstorms. "Believe your own eyes, David," I said, "and remember the woman who raised you. I am not a liar. I am not confused. I am your mother." He pressed his palms to his face, groaned softly. "I don't want to lose you, Ma, but I don't want to lose her either." I reached across, touched his arm gently. "Love doesn't mean choosing theft over truth," I said. "It means finding the courage to stand with what is right." He didn't answer, and after a long silence, he rose and left, shoulders heavier than before. Watching him go, I felt both grief and resolve. He was lost, for now, but I wasn't. That night, before bed, I whispered into the quiet room, "This is my fight, and I will not surrender." I imagined the house on Maple Lane, the lilacs, the porch swing, the morning light in the kitchen. They were waiting for me, patient as always, and I promised them and myself that I would come back, not as a guest, not as an intruder, but as the woman who belonged. The summons arrived folded like a small, stiff bird. Civil action, fraudulent conveyance. Ms. Patel had filed the complaint and a lease pendens, and the court stamped our case number in blue, as if a clerk had pressed the sky onto paper. I held the document on Nora's kitchen table and read every line, lips moving, the way I used to read recipes when the stakes were a birthday cake that could not fall. "They can't sell now," Ms. Patel had said on the phone. "They can't borrow against it. The title is clouded until the judge clears it." The phrase soothed me like a warm cloth on a bruise. Clouded meant mine. Clouded meant time to breathe. 2 days later, I stood in the courthouse, the floors polished to a silence that made you hear your own bones. The hallway smelled of toner and winter coats. Ms. Patel's heels made quick, certain sounds as she guided me to Department 7. "This is just the first case management conference," she reminded me. "No testimony, no fireworks, but we'll see their counsel and set dates." I nodded, clutching my tote, feeling the photocopy of the forged deed like a shield against my side. When we stepped in, I saw them. Emily in a cream dress that looked like it would refuse to wrinkle, David in a suit that didn't quite fit his worry. Beside them sat a man with a briefcase large enough to hold a small, tidy apocalypse. He was their lawyer. He had a haircut that said he never missed. I did not look at Emily first. I looked at my son. He glanced up, and in that flicker I found my boy, as skittish, as a sunlit fish. Then Emily's hand settled on his wrist, and the light in him dimmed to something shaped by her fingers. I sat. The judge entered, gray hair, clear eyes, a voice like the click of a lock aligning. Dates were set, discovery deadlines scribbled. I listened hard, the way you listen to a mechanic explain the condition of your only car. When it was over, the judge asked if counsel wanted to be heard. Ms. Patel rose. Your Honor, we intend to depose the notary and request security footage from Pack and Ship on Elm for the hour of the purported signing. Their lawyer stood too. We'll oppose any fishing expedition, he said smoothly. The judge looked over his glasses. If there's fish, counsel, the net is appropriate. We exited into the hall. Emily approached like a hostess, asking if the appetizers were to our liking. You could have come to us first, she murmured. We could have explained without all this. She waved a manicured hand at the courthouse, the clerks, the people who had arrived with envelopes full of ruin. I tried, I said quietly. You locked me out. Her eyes cooled another degree. For your safety, she said, as if pronunciation could change meaning. David opened his mouth, then closed it. Ms. Patel touched my elbow. We left. The weeks became a rhythm of paper and breath. Ms. Patel requested everything, emails, texts, drafts of the so-called trust. She made lists, and I checked boxes. I pulled bank statements, tax bills, energy bills. Every proof of my hands' work I had kept in folders, labeled with years. You are a clerk's dream, she said once, smiling over a stack. No, I answered. I am an old woman who has been told too many times to save the receipt. Word continued to travel. At church, Pastor Ruth squeezed my shoulders and said a prayer, not for vengeance but for clarity. Let what's true be seen, she said into my hair. After the service, a man I didn't recognize pressed a business card into my palm. He did home repairs and could testify that the week of the alleged signing, I'd been home to let him replace a cracked tile. Mrs. Ramirez wrote me a statement about seeing me at the pharmacy. The teenager who bagged my groceries swore he remembered I joked about never being too old for lollipops that same afternoon. Little lights, all of them, and together they made a map I could follow out of the dark. But darkness doesn't surrender easily. Emily escalated. Packages began arriving at 224 Maple. Bassinets, a white rocking chair, boxes of swaddles. She posted photos online of the nursery. We're preparing, the caption studded with hearts. In one picture, I recognized my quilt, a patchwork of blue and cream squares I had stitched from old shirts and patients. It lay folded over the crib rail, as if it had always been meant for her child, not made by my hands in a winter when David's fevers kept me awake. The rage that rose in me was clean, almost cold. I printed the photo and added it to my folder. Proof, too, of possession, of intent, of a heart that treated other people's histories like decor. One afternoon, Ms. Patel called with a note in her voice I hadn't heard before. Pleased, but careful. Pack and Ship turned over camera footage, she said. On the day of the notary stamp, you don't appear. A woman does. Short, blonde, sunglasses, but the signature doesn't match their log for your ID. I sat very still, the phone hot against my cheek. Did you see her face? Only briefly, but we'll have the notary in for deposition. She paused. He's retained counsel. Of course he had. Paper leaves trails. Money hires brooms. The deposition took place in a conference room with a view of a downtown that had forgotten mill smoke. We sat at a long table. A court reporter set her machine like a small piano and placed her hands on its keys. Mr. Mendez looked smaller than I had imagined, a man who had spent years apologizing to stamps for using them too often. He kept his eyes on the table. Ms. Patel was gentle at first, then precise. "Do you recall notarizing a deed for my name on date?" "Yes," he said. "Did you verify her identity?" "Yes." "What forms of identification did she present?" He swallowed. "Driver's license." Ms. Patel slid a photocopy across. "This is her driver's license. It was in her wallet at a clinic that day. Did you make a photocopy?" He hesitated. His lawyer objected to form, to tone, to the weather. Ms. Patel waited out each objection like a tree waits out wind. "There is no copy," he finally said. "Describe the woman you notarized." He described someone not me. The court reporter's fingers flew. Ms. Patel leaned in. "Would you please compare the signature on this deed with an exemplar of my client's signature?" He did. The silence lengthened until even the fluorescent lights seemed to blink slower. "They're not the same," he whispered. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. The record captured the hand, too. Afterward, in the corridor, Emily and her counsel swept past, perfume and aftershave and indignation. David lagged a step behind. He stopped. "Ma," he said softly. I looked at him and saw what fear had been doing behind his eyes, carving, hollowing, leaving rooms where excuses echoed. "She told me you wanted it this way," he said, voice breaking on the last word. "She said you signed to protect, to make sure the baby." He couldn't finish. I did not touch him. I wanted to, but I needed him to feel the space between us, measured in inches of paper and years of forgetting who taught him to tell the truth. "You watched me carry this family with my back and my hands," I said. "You know my signature better than any notary. You needed to look once." He nodded, a small movement that looked like prayer. "I'm sorry," he said. "Sorry is a word. Its work takes time." That night I didn't sleep. I lay on Nora's couch and listened to the house settle and the rain find the gutters. I thought of the baby, of tiny fingernails like moons, of a name that wasn't chosen yet. I thought of Emily's hunger, a kind that furniture and deeds never feed. I thought of how love, misshapen, becomes entitlement, how fear, flattered, becomes obedience. Near dawn, I rose and made coffee the old way, letting the kettle sing and the grounds bloom. I wrote in my notebook until my hand cramped. Dates, names, the way Mr. Mendez looked when the truth touched him. When the sun finally slipped across the edge of the window, I felt steadier. The fight wasn't a storm to be waited out. It was a climb, and I had shoes that knew the path. Sunday came. Pastor Ruth asked if I would like to speak to the congregation. I shook my head. "Let the courts do the talking," I said. But after the service, a woman I barely knew pressed a folded bill into my palm. "For filing fees," she murmured. I tried to return it. She closed my fingers around it. "I have a mother, too." In the fellowship hall, Mr. Bennett had laid out a clipboard. Neighbors for Maple Lane. People signed their names and phone numbers, willing to stand before a judge and say what they had seen of me across decades. The rides I'd given, the casseroles I'd carried, the keys I'd kept for those who locked themselves out. Community converted itself into evidence. It wasn't the kind of proof lawyers file. It was the kind you live inside. But Ms. Patel took photocopies anyway. The real turn came on a weekday that smelled like chalk and cut grass. I had walked past my house to catch a later bus, unwilling to give the windows the satisfaction of my glance. A moving van idled at the curb. 2 men in uniforms wrestled with the white rocking chair from the nursery. For a second, my breath vanished. Then I saw Emily on the porch, phone to her ear, directing traffic with a hand that had never lifted more than a shopping bag. "Careful, that's custom," she snapped. "Put it in storage 3. We'll deal with the rest when the sale closes." The sale. Ice raced through me and then receded, leaving a clean ache. I stepped onto the path. One of the movers set the chair down, blocking me. "Ma'am," the homeowner asked. "I am the homeowner," I said, and the steadiness in my voice startled even me. "There is a lis pendens recorded. Any sale is frozen. If you remove one more item, you are participating in conversion of disputed property." The mover blinked. People never expect old women to know the names of their rights. Emily lowered her phone. "You're trespassing," she said, smiling as if we were at a party, and I had forgotten the dress code. "Leave, or I'll call the police." "Please do," I answered, "and I'll show them the court order." I lifted my tote, already pulling the stamped copy from its sleeve. She hesitated, a fraction, barely a breath, but it was there. The movers looked from her to me. "Ma'am?" one asked her. She hissed something under her breath I did not catch. The chair remained on the porch, halfway between a room that claimed it and a street that would not take it. We stood in a 3-way pause, me, Emily, and the object that had been made to rock a child to sleep in a room built of stolen plans. Then a voice behind me. "What's going on here?" Mr. Bennett, hands on hips, a few neighbors fanned out behind him like a small jury empaneled by fate. Mrs. Ramirez stepped forward with her phone already open to a photo of the lis pendens I'd texted her. "She's trying to move things out," she told him. "The court froze it." Emily's smile became a bar. "You people need hobbies," she said. "We have one," Mrs. Ramirez replied. "It's called remembering who lives where." Laughter, quiet and sharp. Not cruel, true. The police did come, their lights a tired whirl. They were young, both of them, and they listened because the paper Ms. Patel had secured spoke in a language even tired lights understand. They told the movers to stand down. They told Emily that any attempt to transfer or dispossess during litigation could anger a judge. Emily nodded as if absorbing a lecture she had already decided to ignore. David arrived halfway through, face flushed, tie absent. He took in the van, the neighbors, the chair. His eyes found mine. The look there was new, not defiance, not shame, something like arrival. He walked to the rocking chair, lifted it gently, and carried it back inside. Emily stared at him as if he had suddenly learned a word in a language she thought he wasn't smart enough to speak. "What are you doing?" she demanded. He set the chair down in the living room with a care that felt like apology and said very quietly, "Enough." The movers left. The police scribbled incident numbers. The neighbors drifted away in pairs, leaving footprints of solidarity on the damp walk. Emily stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, as if she needed wood to keep from cracking. She looked at me the way a cat looks at a closed birdcage, furious at limits. "You're destroying our family," she hissed. I thought of the frame print she'd placed on my mantel. Family is everything, and how some people treat everything like a right to plunder. "I'm saving one," I said, not unkindly, and turned toward the gate. My legs trembled when I reached the sidewalk, but they held. That night, back at Nora's, I held the incident card in my palm until the numbers blurred into meaninglessness. Then I wrote the day's events in my notebook with slow, careful letters. The van, the chair, the officers' names, The word David had chosen. Enough. I underlined it once. The house on Maple Lane felt a fraction closer, not because I had stepped over the threshold, but because the truth had. I set the notebook beside the bed and lay down. The window was open a crack. Somewhere a dog barked, then settled. My body ached with the kind of tired that follows a day spent carrying, not objects, but lines in the sand. I closed my eyes and, for the first time in weeks, slept hard and dreamless, like someone whose ground, if not yet reclaimed, was at least finally held. I woke the next morning with a heaviness in my body, the kind that usually comes after funerals or weddings, days when emotions are carried like crates up a long staircase. The incident with the moving van had left me both proud and exhausted. Proud because I had stood tall in front of Emily, the neighbors, and even the police. Exhausted because every victory in this fight seemed to demand a piece of me, and at my age, pieces weren't so easily replaced. Still, when I reached for my notebook on the bedside table and reread the word I had underlined, enough, a small warmth spread through me. My son had spoken that word. My son had, if only for a moment, remembered the blood that tied us, the truth he had seen all his life in my hands and my eyes. Nora knocked gently and came in with coffee. "You slept like a stone," she said, smiling. "I checked twice to make sure you were breathing." I laughed softly. "Stones breathe through the earth," I replied, my voice raspy from the long sleep. She set the cup down. "You'll need your strength. The hearing on the injunction is tomorrow." My stomach tightened. Court again. More papers. More eyes on me, weighing if I was strong or weak, truthful or confused. But I sipped the coffee and nodded. "Let's fight," I whispered. The next day, the courthouse loomed larger than before. Its gray columns looked like sentries guarding secrets, but I walked through the doors anyway, my tote on my arm like a shield. Inside, the air was colder, and the hum of people's voices carried a mixture of dread and routine. Miss Patel met me at the security line, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes sharp with purpose. "This is a motion hearing," she reminded me. "The judge will decide if Emily and David are restrained from altering the property until the full case is heard." I nodded, gripping the strap of my tote. "They already tried," I said, "with that van." She gave me a look that was part approval, part warning. "Then let's make sure the court hears it from your mouth." In the courtroom, Emily sat tall, her cream dress replaced with a navy suit that made her look as though she had been born to testify. David sat beside her, less polished, his fingers rubbing the edge of his ring. When he looked up, our eyes met, and he quickly looked away. Their lawyer stood, papers neat, voice smooth. He argued that Emily and David were simply modernizing the property, preparing it for the family's future. He painted me as resistant, confused, unwilling to adapt. His words slid across the room like oil on tile. I sat still, my breath steady, until the judge asked, "Do you have anything to add, ma'am?" I stood, my knees reminding me of their years, but my back straight. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady but not loud. "They changed the locks on me. They moved my belongings. They attempted to load furniture onto a moving van, despite the list pendants already recorded. I had to call the police. I am not confused. I am not resistant to change. I am a mother who saved every dollar she could for decades to buy a home of her own. That home is mine. What they are doing is theft wrapped in the language of family." I paused, and in the silence, the room seemed to hold its breath. "If you allow them to continue, I will have nothing left. Not the house, not the things that carry memories, not even the dignity of being believed. The judge leaned forward, eyes thoughtful. "And you have evidence of the moving incident?" Miss Patel rose and handed over the police incident card, the neighbors' written statements, even Mrs. Ramirez's photo of the Lis Pendens. The judge read carefully, then nodded once. "Motion granted. Temporary restraining order issued. No alterations, removals, or transfers until further order of this court." The gavel struck. The sound rang like a church bell in my chest. I sat down slowly, my eyes closing just for a moment. As we left, Emily brushed past me, her perfume sharp. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "This is just the beginning. Courts drag on. You'll run out of energy before I run out of time." I turned to her, my face calm. "I've lived long enough to know the difference between time and truth," I said. "Time passes. Truth remains." She narrowed her eyes but said nothing more. That evening, I walked home with Nora. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at autumn, with leaves beginning to curl at the edges. On Maple Lane, the lilacs were fading, their blossoms brown at the tips, but they still stood, stubborn and fragrant, as if reminding me that beauty doesn't vanish just because it grows older. A small group of neighbors waved from their porches. Mr. Bennett called out, "Heard the judge sided with you. About time." My chest swelled, not with pride, but with gratitude. These people had seen me walk to church, to the bus, to the grocery store for years. They had watched me carry groceries and children, sometimes burdens bigger than myself. They believed me. That was worth more than gold. Inside Nora's kitchen, we celebrated with soup and bread. Simple food, but it tasted like triumph. "It's only temporary," Ms. Patel had warned before leaving. "The real battle is ahead. Depositions, cross-examinations, trial if necessary." But I savored the soup anyway. Temporary victories are still victories, and at my age, you learn to take every flame that lights the darkness. That night, as I wrote in my notebook, I paused on the page where I kept the word enough. I added another beneath it, remain, because that was what I intended to do, not just in my house, but in this fight, in this life. Remain present, remain strong, remain the woman my son knew before he forgot. But just as I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number again. This time, it was a photo of me in the courthouse hallway, head bowed, tote at my side. The caption read, "Old trees fall first." My heart clenched. It wasn't just legal now. Emily wanted to frighten me, to break me with shadows. I stared at the screen for a long time, then set the phone down. I whispered into the quiet, as if speaking to the house itself across the distance. "Old trees may fall, but their roots hold the ground." And with that, I turned off the light, lay down on Nora's couch, and prayed for the strength not just to fight, but to endure. For one more day, one more step, until the house that bore my name welcomed me back as its rightful keeper. The message rattled around in my chest long after the screen went dark. Old trees fall first. I could hear her voice in those 4 words, that syrup poured over a knife. I set the phone face down and tried to will my pulse into something slower, steadier. Outside, Nora's street was quiet, in that way only old neighborhoods know. Laughter muffled behind curtains, the occasional dog huffing at a passing shadow, the leaves offering up their dry applause to a breeze. I told myself fear is a visitor. You don't set another plate at the table for it. But when I finally slept, I dreamed of keys that bent like wax in my hands and doors that would not remember me. The morning brought practicalities, as mornings do. Coffee, a shower that hissed like a gentle scold. I wrote the message in my notebook with the same plain letters I use for groceries and bank balances, then copied the number and taped the page's edge with a strip of clear film. Miss Patel had taught me that time and paper eat at each other. I wasn't going to let one undress the other without a fight. Before I'd finished my toast, Nora walked in with a small box in her arms, black plastic and wires coiled like sleeping snakes. "A doorbell camera," she announced. "My nephew had a spare. Humor me." We installed it together, her on the stool, me handing her screws and listening to the little chime on her phone when the picture clicked on. My own face, creased and stubborn, looked back at us from the small screen. "There," she said, "we invite truth to visit too." By late morning, Miss Patel called. Her voice carried the crackle of movement, like she was walking while she talked. "Good news," she said. Pack and Ship produced their point-of-sale logs. Notary fees paid that day at 3:05 p.m. by card ending in 4412. Name on the receipt, Emily Carter. For a second, I couldn't find a chair. When I did, it felt both too hard and the only thing keeping me from floating away. "Can a person pay for someone else's notarization?" I asked, silly even as I said it. "Of course," Miss Patel replied. But combined with the footage and the notary's wobbly memory, it stops being of course and starts looking like orchestration. She cleared her throat. "There's more. We subpoenaed the notary's text messages, business line, the day before the stamp he received. My MIL can't make it in. We'll handle it tomorrow. It's straightforward. She wants this. Number matches Emily's." I felt something in me go very still, like a pond when the wind drops. "Do we have that in writing?" "We do," she said. "Screenshots, metadata. We'll authenticate at deposition." I thanked her and set the phone down as if it were a fragile animal. Then I picked it up again and called David. It rang long enough to let me decide 3 times to hang up. He answered on the cusp. "Ma," he said, breathless, like he'd run from one room to another just to be the man who picks up when his mother calls. "We need to talk," I said. "Please." Silence hummed. "After work," he agreed. "I'll come to Nora's." All afternoon, the camera sent us small dispatches from the world. A cat that considered the stoop, decided against it. A mail carrier with a rubber band around her wrist, like a promise. The card from the court with a new date circled in blue. At dusk, the bell chimed softly, and there he was on the screen, my son with his hair in need of a comb and his mouth already apologizing. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood in the entry, hands in his pockets like a boy caught with an extra cookie. "I can't stay long," he said, the old preface to hard conversations. "Sit," I answered, and led him to the kitchen table where so many of life's verdicts are delivered without a judge. He pulled out a folded paper and placed it between us. A sonogram, gray fog, and a small, stubborn crescent no bigger than a thumbnail. I touched the corner. "She's okay?" I asked. "Or he?" He swallowed. "They say everything looks good." Pride and ache braided themselves in my chest. "Good," I said. "May that child never learn a lie from the people who love it." He flinched like I'd thrown water. "Ma, I didn't know," he blurted. "I swear to you, she told me you wanted the trust, that you'd talk to someone at church about taxes and probate and not being a burden." He looked at his hands. "She said you signed. She showed me a text where you told her to do what's best for the family." He glanced up. "I think now she typed it to herself. She had my phone one night, my iPad." He trailed off. shame scalding the underside of his voice. I let my own hands rest on the table, open, empty. Ms. Patel has the notary's texts, I said, and the receipt with Emily's card. We'll get an expert for the signature, even if the judge could see with his own eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut once, hard. I can't believe I didn't. You can, I cut in gently. Believing is what love does. But believing blindly is what fear asks for. He nodded, made of yes, then reached into his jacket and set his house key beside the sonogram. The good old brass with its small notch, the one that had lived on my red ribbon before it was replaced by an imposter. I don't know if I have the right, he said, voice thin. But I want you to have this. When this is over, I want you to come through your own door. My fingers hovered over the key, then closed. Metal met skin with the satisfaction of a puzzle piece finding home. Thank you, I whispered. He stared at the table so the moment could be small enough to survive. The bell chimed again before we could stand. On Nora's phone, Emily's face filled the frame, too close, her eyes catching the lens like glass. She didn't wait for an answer. She knocked hard with the side of her fist, the sound traveling straight to the hinge of my jaw. David, she called, bright and sharp at once. Open up. He stiffened. She tracked me, he muttered. She tracks everything. The word lodged in me like a sliver, present, telling, married to other words I'd half noticed. Who are you texting? Where were you? Why didn't you answer? In the kitchen's thin light, I saw the boy who wasn't sleeping and the man who said enough to a rocking chair because it was the only thing he could lift. Nora was ahead of any scene we might have rehearsed. She stepped into the hall and opened the door just wide enough to let in a sliver of night air and no more. This is my house, she said, calm as a judge. If you're here to talk, I'm listening. If you're here to perform, the stage is elsewhere. Emily tried to peer around her. I want my husband. He's not a coat, Nora replied. You don't check him in and out. Emily laughed without humor. Do you hear the way they talk to you, David? She called, pitching her voice like a net. You're being humiliated. David stood, leaned toward the archway, and for a second I tasted old dread, the familiar tilt of a son toward the loudest voice. But he didn't step through. Go home, Em, he said, not loudly, not cruelly. We'll talk there. She blinked at the sound of her nickname in a sentence that didn't obey. Her face tightened. You're choosing her. I'm choosing a truth I can sleep beside, he answered. The line hung in the air like a stitched seam. She didn't leave. She lowered her voice and tried again. She's poisoning you against your own family. The word family did that cage rattle it always does when used as a leash. Emily, I said, stepping where she could see me over Nora's shoulder. I don't record people without telling them. My lawyer does. The notary's texts show your number. The receipt shows your card. You can unwind a lie while it's small. Past a certain size, it wraps you back. Her mouth thinned. Old trees fall first, she said softly, like a spell. The door camera caught it. Nora's phone saved it. My notebook would hold it until a judge could read what a machine had heard. She finally left, heels tapping retreat, car doors slamming like punctuation. We three stood in the hallway and let the quiet soak back into the wood. David seemed suddenly smaller, without the argument to keep him tall. He sat again, scrubbed his face with his palms, and let out a breath I could feel across the table. I'll tell the truth, he said, at the deposition, at trial if it comes to that. I'll say what I saw, what I didn't, what I believed because I wanted to. I won't let her use family like a crowbar. He looked at me. I don't know what happens to my marriage after that. I took his hand. It was not my job to rescue his choices, only to witness them. Something happens to you, I said. That's the part that matters. After he left, Nora and I watched the doorbell footage again, not because it would change, but because repetition shows you the small things you missed. The way Emily's eyes flicked left before she smiled, checking the street. The flash of the bracelet I'd given her last Christmas and never saw again. The way the porch light made her look younger and harder at once. I saved the clip to a folder Ms. Patel had named with the case number, learned to label it the way paralegals do. YWATS, YMMMDD, entry, Emily. It felt fussy. It felt like armor. Near midnight, my phone buzzed with a new message. No photo this time, just a line of text. You'll die in that house before you live in it. It should have sunk me. Instead, it enraged me into clarity. I forwarded it to Ms. Patel with a single sentence, adding to evidence of intimidation. Then I powered the phone off and set it beside the key my son had given me. The two objects lay there like a problem and its answer. Sleep came in starts. In one of them, I found myself in the Maple Lane kitchen, morning light pooling exactly where I'd imagined. My old bowls stacked neatly again, the fair photograph on the mantel, the rocking chair creaking on the porch, because someone had just stood up from it to go make coffee. I woke with the taste of that scene still on my tongue, as real as any meal. Outside, dawn was beginning to explain the world to itself. I rose, put on the kettle, and opened my notebook to a fresh page. At the top, in steady letters, I wrote, "Keys, not slogans, open doors." Then below it, today's date, and the first line of the day's account. The evidence keeps choosing me back. The morning after Emily's midnight threat, the world seemed strangely ordinary. Sunlight poured through Nora's lace curtains, scattering patterns across the floor, as if nothing sinister had been whispered through my phone just hours before. But the words lingered. You'll die in that house before you live in it. They had been meant to frighten me into silence, into surrender. Instead, they sat inside me like a coal, glowing, reminding me I was still alive enough to fight. I dressed carefully, not for vanity, but for armor. A press blouse, my sturdy shoes, the necklace David once bought me on Mother's Day when he was 15, when a part-time job at the diner felt like riches. I wanted to carry proof around my neck that he hadn't always been lost. When I walked into Ms. Patel's office later that morning, she noticed. "You look prepared," she said. I set my tote on her desk and pulled out the phone, showing her the threat. She read it twice, her brow tightening with each pass. "This," she said, "is more than intimidation. This is potential witness tampering. I'll file a motion immediately." She leaned back, her voice steady but urgent. "And from now on, keep every message, every slip of paper, every whispered threat. Courts like evidence, abusers like silence. We'll give the court what it likes." Her words steadied me, but the day didn't pass without cracks. At the grocery store, I saw Emily again. She was standing near the produce section, one hand absently on her stomach, the other pointing at oranges as she chatted with a neighbor. When she noticed me, her smile widened unnaturally. "Mother-in-law," she called across the aisle, too loud, as though to perform civility. "How are you?" The neighbor glanced at me, eyes curious. I walked closer, measured, and replied, "I am as well as any woman can be when her own signature is stolen." The neighbor's smile faltered. Emily's eyes flashed, but her lips never lost their curve. "She's been confused," Emily said sweetly. "Age does that." The cruelty was casual, practiced. I leaned on my cart and answered, loud enough for the oranges to hear. "Age teaches us to keep receipts, Emily. I've got mine." The neighbor quickly excused herself, pretending to study bananas. Emily leaned in, voice sharp. "You're humiliating yourself. Stop this before you lose him completely." My hand tightened on the cart handle. "He is not yours to lose or keep," I said. "He is a man, not property, and he has begun to remember that." Her face paled, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the panic beneath. She left without buying anything, the echo of her heels chasing her down the aisle. That evening, Nora and I sat with the doorbell camera feed open on her phone. Twice the screen flickered with shadows that didn't match passing cars. At midnight, we caught her. Emily, standing at the edge of the porch, slipping an envelope into the mailbox. By the time we reached the door, she was gone. I opened the box with shaking hands. Inside was a single piece of paper, torn from a magazine, with 3 words written in thick black marker: "You can't win." I pressed the page flat on the table, the ink smudging slightly beneath my fingertips. Nora took photos, and I slid the paper into a clear sleeve, adding it to my growing archive of truth. The next day in court, Ms. Patel presented the messages and the mailbox note. The judge frowned, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "This is troubling," he said. "Counsel, advise your clients that any further conduct resembling intimidation will weigh heavily in my decisions." Emily's lawyer tried to argue that the messages could not be tied to her with certainty, but the judge wasn't moved. "Circumstantial evidence builds walls," he said, "and I am starting to see bricks." For the first time, I saw Emily's confidence waver in the courtroom itself. She sat stiff, her smile gone, one hand curled so tightly around her pen I thought it might snap. After the hearing, David lingered in the hallway. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside me, staring at the vending machine as if it held answers. Finally, he whispered, "I saw the messages. I believe you now." His voice broke. "I don't know how to fix what I've let happen." I touched his arm gently. "You fix it by standing where truth is, even if it costs you." He nodded, though fear still clung to him. Days turned into a quiet siege. Neighbors kept watch, walking by the house on Maple Lane more often, their presence a silent declaration that I wasn't alone. Pastor Ruth organized a small prayer circle, not for miracles, but for endurance. "Let justice be like water," she prayed, her voice low and sure. And in my own prayers, I asked not for vengeance, but for the strength to see this through to the end, no matter how long the road stretched. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the doorbell camera chimed again. This time it wasn't Emily. It was David, standing with a cardboard box in his arms. When I opened the door, he set it on the table without a word. Inside were some of my things, my chipped white bowls, the quilt I'd sewn, a photo of me and his father at the county fair. "I told her these belonged to you," he said quietly. His eyes were wet, his shoulders slumped. "She called me weak. Maybe I am. But weak men can still do one right thing." My throat tightened. "You did more than one right thing tonight," I said. That night, I lay awake with the quilt pulled to my chin. I traced the stitches I had made years ago, each one a tiny act of hope. My son was beginning to return to me, stitch by stitch. Emily's threats had grown louder, yes, but so had the evidence, so had the community around me. For the first time in months, I felt the balance tipping, not heavily, not completely, but tilting toward the truth. Before I closed my notebook for the night, I wrote a new line beneath the others. Threats are the songs of the desperate, but roots don't listen, they hold. The day of the evidentiary hearing arrived with skies the color of pewter and air that pressed heavy on my lungs. I buttoned my blouse with deliberate care, the same way a soldier knots laces before battle. Nora fussed with my collar until it lay flat, then placed my notebook into my tote as if it were sacred scripture. "You've lived this truth," she whispered. "Now let them see it." At the courthouse, Ms. Patel greeted me with her usual brisk nod. "Today is about proof," she said, guiding me through the crowded hall. "We've lined up the handwriting expert, the notary's testimony, and the payment logs. It's not the final trial, but it will set the tone." My palms sweated despite the autumn chill. I thought of the chipped bowls now resting safely back with me, of the quilt stitched with patience. They were not just things. They were proof of belonging. Proof mattered. Inside the courtroom, Emily sat with her lawyer, composed as marble. David was beside her, but his shoulders sagged, his tie askew. He looked like a man caught between two cliffs, knowing the leap would break him either way. When our eyes met, he gave the smallest nod. My heart trembled, but steadied itself again. The proceedings began with the handwriting expert, a professor from the university, spectacles perched at the edge of her nose. She displayed side-by-side enlargements, my authentic signatures from past deeds and bank checks against the scrawled flourish on the quitclaim deed. "These are not consistent," she said firmly. "The slant, the pressure, the loop formations differ significantly. In my professional opinion, the signature on the deed is a forgery." The words rang out like clear bells. Emily's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him down. Next came Mr. Mendez, the notary. He shifted in his chair, his hands twisting a pen. I believe the woman was authorized," he mumbled. Ms. Patel leaned forward. "Did you personally witness my name sign this deed?" His voice dropped. "No." The court reporter's keys clacked like a typewriter of judgment. The judge's eyes narrowed. "You understand the seriousness of this admission." Mr. Mendez nodded miserably. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but the damage was done. Then Ms. Patel introduced the payment log. Projected on the courtroom screen were the pack and ship records, the line item clear as daylight. Notary fee, card ending 4412, name Emily Carter. Gasps rustled through the benches. Emily's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze fixed ahead. "This is circumstantial," her lawyer argued, his voice strained now. "A card doesn't prove intent." Ms. Patel's reply was cool. "When combined with falsified signatures and misleading texts, it becomes more than circumstantial. It becomes a pattern." The judge turned to Emily. "Mrs. Carter, do you wish to explain why your payment method appears on this record?" For the first time, her composure cracked. A flush crept up her neck. "I was helping my family," she said quickly. "My mother-in-law was overwhelmed. She asked me to handle the details. I paid as a kindness." Her tone was honeyed, but the room had tasted too much vinegar to believe. Then came the turning point. Ms. Patel displayed a printout of the text retrieved from the notary's phone. "My MIL can't make it in. We'll handle it tomorrow. It's straightforward. She wants this." The sender's number matched Emily's. "Do you deny sending this?" Ms. Patel asked. Emily's lips parted, but no words emerged. David's head snapped toward her, eyes wide. "You told me he began, but his lawyer hushed him with a tug on the sleeve. The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Carter, you may speak if it clarifies." David swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "She told me my mother wanted it this way, that she'd agreed. She showed me this text as proof. I believed her." His face crumpled. "But if that's her number, then I was deceived." Silence filled the room, heavy and absolute. Emily's face hardened into something cold, brittle. "Don't be naive, David," she hissed under her breath, but the microphone caught it. The judge leaned back, eyes grave. "What I see here is troubling. A forged signature, a compromised notary, and communications that suggest deliberate misrepresentation. This case will proceed to full trial, but I advise the defendants to consider their position carefully. The court does not look kindly on fraud, particularly when coupled with intimidation tactics." His gaze lingered on Emily like a searchlight. When the session adjourned, I sat still for a moment, letting the gavel's echo fade inside me. People shuffled out, murmuring. Emily stormed past without looking at me, her heels striking the floor like accusations. David lingered. He walked toward me slowly, his eyes red-rimmed. "Ma," he whispered, voice raw. "I'm sorry. I should have seen sooner." I reached for his hand. It trembled, but it met mine. "You see now," I said. "That is enough." On the way home, Nora squeezed my arm. "The mask slipped," she said softly. "And once a mask cracks, it never fits the same again." I nodded, staring out at the gray sky. For the first time, I felt the weight shift. Not fully, not finally, but enough to imagine my footsteps echoing once more in the hallways of Maple Lane. That night, I laid the quilt across my lap and wrote in my notebook, "Lies are loud at first, but truth has patience." Today the truth was heard. The final day in court dawned cold and sharp, as if the weather itself had decided to strip away pretenses. I rose early, buttoning the same blouse I had worn at the first hearing, pressed and sturdy, as though repeating the ritual would remind me of how far I had come. My tote was heavy with papers, receipts, photos, sworn statements, every scrap of truth I had gathered along this long and bitter road. Nora stood beside me as we walked into the courthouse, her arm linked through mine like a second spine. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet expectation. The benches were fuller than before, neighbors, church friends, even the boy from the grocery store who had once bagged my lollipops. They had come to see whether truth could outlast the cleverness of lies. Across the aisle, Emily sat poised, her navy suit immaculate, her chin lifted high. But the eyes told another story, rimmed red, restless, darting toward the judge's bench and away again. David was beside her, but there was distance in his posture now, an invisible wall she couldn't lean across. The proceedings began with closing arguments. Emily's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth but brittle at the edges. He painted her as a young woman trying to protect a family, overwhelmed by complexities of law and inheritance, acting only with good intentions. His words slid across the room, but they landed without weight. Too many cracks had shown, too much had been proven. Then Miss Patel rose. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is about more than signatures and deeds. It is about whether the law will allow love and trust to be twisted into tools of theft. My client saved for decades to buy her home. She signed no deed. She gave no consent. The evidence shows a forged signature, a compromised notary, a payment trail, leading directly to Mrs. Carter, and text messages confirming her intent. What has been stolen is not only property, but dignity. Today, we ask the court to give both back. The judge listened, expression grave. He shuffled the papers before him, then looked directly at Emily. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice like iron doors closing. "The court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraud. The quitclaim deed is void. Title remains with the plaintiff." His gaze swept the room. Further, the court refers the matter for criminal investigation regarding the forgery and notarial misconduct. He lifted the gavel and struck it once, final. The sound reverberated through me, not just as wood on wood, but as justice breaking chains. Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. I sat still, my breath caught in my chest, until Ms. Patel touched my arm. "It's yours again," she whispered. Only then did the tears come, hot and unashamed. Across the aisle, Emily's mask shattered. Her lips trembled, her eyes wide with something like disbelief. She rose abruptly, heels clattering against the tile, and stormed out, her lawyer scrambling after her. The door slammed behind them, the echo thin and hollow compared to the gavel's authority. David remained. He didn't move at first, as if pinned to the bench by the weight of all his choices. Then he stood and walked toward me, slow, measured. When he reached me, he knelt, not out of ceremony, but because his legs buckled under the apology that pressed through his body. "Ma," he whispered, tears running freely. "I'm sorry. I let her do this. I let myself believe." I cupped his face in my hands, the way I had when he was a boy after a scraped knee. "You see me now," I said softly, "and that is enough." The courthouse emptied slowly, neighbors pressing my hand, Pastor Ruth murmuring blessings, Nora squeezing me tight. Together we stepped out into the sunlight. It was brighter than it had been in months, warm and clear, washing the courthouse steps in gold. For the first time, I let myself imagine walking through the door of Maple Lane again, not as a trespasser, not as a defendant, but as the woman who had fought for it and won. A week later, the locks were changed, back to mine. I slipped the red ribbon around my neck once more, the brass key cool and familiar against my chest. When I pushed the door open, the house breathed me in as if it had been waiting. The lilacs nodded outside the window, the porch swing creaked its welcome. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the mantel, the worn kitchen counter. My bowls were back in their cupboard, my quilt folded neatly on the sofa. The house was scarred by the storm, yes, but so was I, and like me, it still stood. That evening, David came by. He carried the sonogram in his pocket and placed it on the mantel beside the county fair photograph. "I want my child to know you," he said quietly, "to know the woman who fought, who never gave up." I looked at him, at the man who had been lost and was finding his way home again. "Then teach them truth," I replied. "That's all I ask." Later, as I sat by the window, the sunset poured into the living room, painting everything in warm amber. I felt the years on my shoulders, the loneliness, the betrayals, but also the triumph. I had been underestimated, dismissed, even threatened. Yet here I was, in my own chair, in my own house, still breathing, still strong. And to you, listening now, did you like my story? From which city are you watching? Tell me in the comments so I know where my voice has reached. And don't forget, subscribe so you won't miss the next story of love, loss, and the strength to endure. Because old trees do not fall first. They hold the ground for everything that grows after them.